Essentials with Helen Farmer.
Talking burnout this afternoon, and burnt out was everywhere earlier in the pandemic, but it was supposed to get better as the most, painful effects of the pandemic subsided. You know, when people could have that regular childcare, could see friends, back in the office, eat out, when fewer people were dying and the world would seem less bad. Then burnout would ease, the thinking went. That hasn't happened. In fact, reports of burnout are getting worse. To help us unpick this and, of course, most importantly, answer your questions, Dr. Abdul Salam Al-Hakim is with us, experienced specialist psychiatrist in the Emirates Hospital. Dr. Abdul, how are you today? How are your burnout levels, sir?
Right. My burnout today, I'm trying to de-stress myself with some of my de-stressing technique and doing some of my hobbies. So I'm not there yet. I'm not there now today.
I have good burnt out days and bad burnt out days. I was a little overwhelmed this morning when I accidentally drove to Global Village. That wasn't my finest organisational moment, but I'm fine, to be honest. But a lot of people I speak to are on the edge and really seem incredibly overwhelmed. And I wondered, and in truth, whenever I have experts on the show, in the studio, whether it is physiotherapists or GPs, psychiatrists, psychologists, and I ask, what's coming into clinic? Stress, stress, stress. What about you? What are you seeing?
Well, you see, Helen, I have been, as a psychiatrist, you see a lot of depression, you see a lot of burnout. But in the past, it was actually more restricted to certain career, more restricted to certain jobs, like health, like, human activists, like human services. But now what you see, it's more broader. Actually, you see teachers coming with burnout. You see IT people, tech industry. You see advertisement industry. People with the customer service coming with a burnout. So it's. I think one of the things which I'm seeing is a broader kind of career rather than our typical careers which they get burnout, and we know that they are high risk of burning out. What also I see here, Helen, it's unfortunately they will come not like within the burnout thing. They come after being burnout, where they develop kind of depression and chronic and acute depression. So I see more intense and broader kind of people who are coming forward to my clinic.
That is interesting, because this is a study out of the US. It was Slack's Future Forum study. They said 3% of US office workers feel, quote, burnt out at work. Does that figure ring true? 43% of people?
I wouldn't. I actually would expect a more higher burnout with the climate after the pandemic, and some people now speaking about a recession coming. In fact, I think last week I've just read an article in one of the British journal that about 68% of workers in NHS had an annual leave due to stress-related condition. Now, 68 is a huge number.
And now, burnout was actually only formally recognised by the World Health Organization in 2019. And I'm pretty sure the years between then and now have seen something of a spike. Not as an illness, but as you say, an occupational health phenomenon, which they say is resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And it kind of talks about symptoms like feeling drained of energy, being less professionally effective, feeling cynical, negative, distant from your job. So the examples that I found, things like a nurse who's too jaded to feel for patients, or a war correspondent who's too numb to atrocities, in terms of examples. But you're saying that actually, and those two are two very stressful jobs, this is becoming a bit broader now in terms of people that are affected. What about age groups, Dr. Abdul? What are we seeing in terms of people affected in that kind of demographic?
Yeah, I think the age group which attends my my clinic is in 27, relatively young, onwards, basically, to 55, 60 years old.
Generation Gen Z do tend to be, will raised to be more open about mental health. So they perhaps might find, I'm totally guessing here, might find it easier than perhaps older workers, me being an elder millennial, the boomers, to those older generations might feel a bit more reluctant or embarrassed or unaware to admit to feelings of being overwhelmed, being able to carry on. Is that a fair assessment, or are you seeing something different in clinic?
This does not translate in my clinic. In fact, I see a lot of young clients who comes to me telling me the workplace is so toxic. I cannot take one day off. I cannot go on annual leave. I cannot tell my HR manager, because what I'm starting to see here is starting to see like the beginning of Silicon Valley, where this burnout companies, those people who the companies don't want a kind of employee. They want A plus employee. They actually, some of them, they will tell you, no, burnout is good. Actually, they save us from firing the not good employee. And actually,
how very Darwin. Abdul, can I put a question to you? More of a comment that's come in anonymously on text line saying, I understand burnout. However, it has become easier to talk about. It's being abused for some people to quit or not face challenges at work. And I think that's a really interesting point, because work is work. There are going to be challenges. You're not there for an easy ride and then get paid at the end of the month. Do you feel like perhaps is being a bit overused by some people who might want to avoid, getting their work done?
At times maybe, but to tell you the truth, the vast majority, which I'm talking about more than 80% who I see in my clinic, they are not lack of talent. They are not lack of commitment. In fact, there are a couple of things which the problem is that we sometimes need to fit the person into the job, and I think we should do the other way around. We should fit the job with the person rather than fitting the person in the job. The things like workloads. People, they have studied burnout for a long time, and I think one of the doctors, her name is Christina Maslach, she is one of the lead of the world in the burnout, and she studied burnout in a long in decades, and she found out there is a mismatch of things. There is core things like workload versus resources, control versus autonomy, being control in the work rather than to have an autonomy to be creative, being rewarded versus and the reward is not only the paycheck, the reward also social reward. Having a toxic community with a lot of people comes to me telling me, look, there is a toxic community inside my work, and fairness and unfairness, with also a value. I'm really sorry to be alone here, but what I'm trying to say is that people, they can't tolerate some of this. But if it is all together, they will end up burning out sooner or later, and they will be less productive than being what the employers they want, really.
Dr. Abdul, I'm keeping you with us because we have had a message that we're going to voice because this listener would like to be anonymous. If you want to get in touch and share your thoughts on this, if you've got any concerns on the topic of burnout, you can be anonymous if you prefer. We'd be happy to read out a message, to leave your name off. Makes no odds at all. We're also going to talk about diagnosis and treatment, plus going to the text line.
Life Balance on Afternoons with Helen Farmer.
Speaking now to specialist psychiatrist at Emirates Hospital, Dr. Abdul Salam Hakim, who is taking my questions, but most importantly yours, on the topic of burnout. We have had a number of messages, questions, and have a listen to this.
Hi Helen, I work at a company that focuses more on getting money into the company, whether it means overworking staff or promising unrealistic deadlines, and the only people that suffer is the staff, and we are very understaffed. We don't get paid for additional hours, and we are asked to compensate it by taking days in lieu. I have the hardest time trying to carve out a little time just for myself or my family. My health has been bad since June this year, and I can never seem to get it to stay stable for more than 2 days. I'm always tired, constant headaches, and other issues due to the lack of proper diet or sleep schedule. Desperately trying to switch jobs right now.
Thank you for that. Dr. Abdul, I'm sure this is a very familiar story. You know, whenever I look at, what can we do to avoid burnout? It's like, well, you meditate for an hour a day. And you go, well, yeah, that sounds great. But I've also got, in this case, a very demanding job, not enough time. What do you find to be effective? And what would you say to this listener?
I would advise, really. I mean, we are so good about advising about resilience, about getting some strength, de-stressing yourself, eating healthy, sleeping healthy. I mean, but taking some annual leave, do some exercise. But I think the main problem is not now. The main problem is upstream. The main problem is the job itself. I think my advice would be for her employers rather than her. I think they need to look into, if they want the productivity, then they need to look into their employee well-being, their employee burnout risk, and that's how this patient and the business itself grows rather than this. But individually, I really struggle because what I have is about asking them to do some good eating balance, taking some off time, sleeping well, doing exercise. But if they are working a long hours, they wouldn't have time to do all of that.
No, that's right. And, we're still in, when, it comes to jobs as well, that listener saying, desperate looking for a new job. That's a tough thing to be trying to navigate, that job uncertainty, or trying to put your best kind of foot and face forward in order to change those circumstances. I know what you're saying. It is absolutely a company problem. I just don't think that many companies are that bothered. I think they might say, yes, we do care about employee well-being, but when it comes down to it, they also want a job done and they want to get the money in, and there are going to be casualties in the process, which it sounds like this listener is. And a really interesting point here, Doctor, that's been raised on the text line saying, do mums burn out? How can we get better if so, especially exhausted with 3 or more young kids? Absolutely, mums can get burnt out. Absolutely. My goodness, yes. Any insights for parents?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I think what it could be for mom, because their job does not end after they leave the office. Their job actually just probably will start when they get home again. So I think is striking a working life balance. They can go for so long actually with the hectic hours working, but at the end of the day, if they don't get a really good job life balance, they will burn out, and they will burn out very quickly. Many of my actually clients who come to clinic saying really we just need some time with our kids, sometimes to look after them, sometimes to entertain them, and we didn't find. And then when we get annual, when we get offset, we find out the life is not only about our job, but we are missing a lot to do with our kids.
And I think for, mums who aren't working outside of the home, they're at home with the kids all day, that's the job that doesn't end. I often come to the office for a bit of a break from my kids and it's a bit of a headspace. But for those who perhaps don't have help and there is no quote unquote escape from the noise and the questions and the demands, and, I love my kids more than I can say, but my goodness, that is the toughest job. It really, really is. And one thing that, I can only share my experience, but when I was at home a lot more than I am now, asking for help was key. And I felt like I was worried about being perceived as a bad mother for needing a bit of time away from the kids. And that is absolutely not the case. Whether it is your husband having a more hands-on role, being able to pay someone to come in and take some responsibilities off your plate. Don't underestimate your stress you're under, even though you're not in paid employ.
I agree totally with you, Helen. In fact, one of the things is some moms, they feel guilty if they, for example, delegate some job for the nanny or the dad to look after the kids. But I would encourage them to do so, because they cannot look after their job, look even after their kids 24/7. They would need the help.
Yep, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and we always come back to that very cliched kind of vision of, you always put your own oxygen mask on before someone else is on the plane, and that is true. You can't look after your kids, you can't look after your family unless you're taking care of you. Dr. Abdul, we've run out of time. I haven't run out of questions. I'd love to explore this further, so thank you so much for your time. Really, really do appreciate it. And I think hopefully, as you say, things will change in some companies. It might not change in others, but we can control what we can control. And I think reaching out for help when you need it is a really, really big part of that. Dr. Abdul, really appreciate your time. Thank you. Speaking to us from Emirates Hospital there as a specialist psychiatrist. And thank you for downloading this episode of the Afternoons with Helen Farmer podcast. Don't forget, you can subscribe. You'll get it direct to your phone as soon as it's out. And you can listen to me live on Dubai Eye 103.8, Monday to Friday between 2 and 5 p.m.